related to, that supports long-term economic, social, environmental, sustainability, and resilience for the Juneau, for Juneau as a community. And JCOS, it's the acronym, aligns its work with the sustainability goals established by the Assembly. One focus is to provide public outreach and education, such as these sustainability sessions, which we are offering on the fourth Thursday each month at noon. This session is being recorded and will be found on the JCOS website, which you can reach through CBJ Community Development Department. Today's presenter is Lori Sowa, who is an engineer at the CBJ Engineering and Public Works Department. Panelists include Lisa Doherty, who is the JCOS Solid Waste Committee Chair. We may have an additional member joining us from the commission, David Teal, who is also on the Solid Waste Committee. And Lori also has a co-worker of hers, Stuart Ashton, who is the who runs the CBJ Recycle program. We ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, Lori's going to make a presentation and we're going to hold the questions till the end, but we will be monitoring them and address them after she speaks. And if you have any other follow-up comments or suggestions for future sustainability sessions on solid waste or other topics regarding Juneau sustainability, you can use the email address at the JCOS website. So at this time, I will hand this over to Lori Sowa.
Thank you, Gretchen. And I'm going to go ahead and get my screen shared. And let's see, is that showing up okay? Are you seeing my full screen? Excellent. Okay, well, thank you for taking the time today to talk about solid waste. As Gretchen said, my name is Lori Sowa and I'm a utilities engineer for the City and Borough of Juneau. I serve several roles in the department, one of which is to oversee the Recycle Works program and to be involved in solid waste discussions. So Angeli asked me to come and talk today and give really a solid waste 101, kind of a just the facts talk to lay the groundwork for potential future conversations about solid waste. So the images that I have here on this title slide show a few types of solid waste. Actually, all of these items could actually be considered resources as well too, because they could all be repurposed into something else. But they're very kind of neat and orderly images, but that's not the way that solid waste actually works. Solid waste is a pretty messy topic, and management of solid waste can be very complicated. Involves a lot of different people at different levels. So individuals, community, businesses, local government, state government, federal government. So a lot of players involved with solid waste management. And really the question today is, how is solid waste managed in Juneau? And what is the City and Borough of Juneau's role in the current management structure for solid waste? So I wanted to start out talking a little bit about the different types of wastes that are produced by our community. You know, you think about waste you produce at home, right? Household garbage. Everyone produces that type of waste, but there are other wastes produced by our community, either directly by us or maybe that we contribute to because we're part of the community. We have construction debris that is produced through private projects as well as municipal projects. Food waste is another type of waste that's produced. We produce it in our households, restaurants and grocery stores and other facilities like that produce food waste as well. Recyclable materials, a lot of this is containers, cans and bottles and cardboard. Household hazardous waste is another type of waste that we produce that we have to figure out how to deal with. So things like used motor oil, old paint, old light bulbs, lots of different things can be categorized as hazardous waste that we need to deal with. Biosolids is another waste that's produced by our community, and biosolids are the solid byproduct of our wastewater treatment process. So that's something that we all contribute to as a community, and it's a waste that we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to deal with. And then junk vehicles is another example of a type of waste that's produced in the community that we need to figure out what to do with. So with this slide, I wanted to take these wastes and lay out what businesses and entities manage certain parts of the waste management for these items. So we think about household waste that we produce. We have curbside garbage collection. The private company that is responsible for curbside garbage collection is Alaska Waste. And then that waste is transported to the landfill, which is managed by Waste Management, which is another private company that is in charge of managing the local landfill. And so on the right-hand side of the screen, I'm listing the entities responsible. We're also thinking about who's regulating these companies and those operations. So the Regulatory Commission of Alaska would be the regulating agency for garbage collection. And the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation is the regulatory authority for solid waste disposal. And I have a slide further on that talks a little bit more in detail about that. So we also, some of us have commingled recycling, curbside pickup for commingled recycling. So you have a bin that you can put all sorts of different recyclable materials into, and that is a service that is provided by Alaska Waste, again, our garbage hauler. And that material is then processed and shipped south to recyclers through Alaska Waste. So then we have source separated recycling. So if you've used the CBJ Recycling Center, that's a little bit of a different service, and we'll talk in more detail about what all that entails. But that is a CBJ run program and funded program. Waste Management is our contractor to actually do that work, but that is a CBJ supported program, and those materials are then shipped south to recyclers. We have a junk vehicle program too. So any non-commercial junk vehicles can be taken in through the CBJ junk vehicle program. That material is then shipped south as well. And that is a CBJ program. Household hazardous waste can be brought in through the CBJ household hazardous waste program as well. Again, that material is shipped south for either disposal or recycling if it's something that we can recycle. And then food waste. So food waste gets disposed of in a lot of different ways. Might be put into a garbage can and go to the landfill, might be ground up and put down your garbage disposal through the sink and then ends up at the wastewater treatment facility. Or that food waste, ideally, probably one of the best uses that we could have for that food waste would be to compost it. And then that becomes something that's reused locally. And so Juneau Compost is a private company that operates a composting facility and offers that service for a fee. And there's lots of folks out there doing home composting as well. So, there's probably some other waste management that's going on out there, but this is a general overview of what our management structure is here in Juneau. So I wanted to touch on this a little bit more. This is the regulatory agency. There's a lot of folks that think that the city and borough of Juneau manages the landfill or manages the garbage hauling or has some sort of regulatory oversight there. And for garbage hauling, it's RCA, the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. So a state agency that regulates that utility. And there's lots of good information on the RCA's website if you want to dig into that a little bit further. And on the landfill side, it's the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, the Environmental Health Division Solid Waste Program is how the landfill is regulated and managed. So there's a lot of great information again on DEC's website as well. And in fact, as I was pulling this up this morning, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but down here, there's actually a solid waste boot camp that has a lot of different presentations and good information on DEC's website as well too. So there's another source of information. Okay, so again, getting back to the question, how is solid waste managed and what's CBJ's role? So Alaska Waste is the private company that owns the collection and hauling service for CBJ's garbage. They hold the certificate of convenience and necessity through the RCA to collect garbage, sort of like a permit. And Waste Management owns the Capital Disposal Landfill, and they operate the landfill. So as it currently stands, CBJ, we can't legally collect garbage. We would have to have the RCA certificate for that, but we can collect recyclable materials. So our CBJ programs, our RecycleWorks programs have been focused on, what we can control, waste diversion. So collecting recyclable materials, offering a service to the public, residents and businesses that provides a way to dispose of hazardous materials. So keeping it out of the landfill where it's not supposed to be, keeping it out of the environment, other places where it could end up. And also offering a service to provide residents with a way to properly dispose of junk vehicles so that there's an avenue to properly get rid of them, and it decreases the number of vehicles that end up out the road or other places that we then have to deal with other needs. So I wanted to put a funding note up here. If you think about these types of programs, these recycling programs, the more successful we are, the more expensive these programs are, because it's based on how much we bring in. So just something to keep in mind. Of course, we can always look for efficiencies, and we do, but the more successful we are with these programs, the more they cost. Okay, so an overview of CBJ's current recycling programs. We said we manage a junk vehicle program, household hazardous waste program, and a recycling program as well. The junk vehicle program volumes have gone up substantially over the last few years. We're seeing more and more people use that program. Household hazardous waste as well. I don't have the numbers for fiscal year 2001, but I understand just from talking with Stuart that our volumes are up substantially through the household hazardous waste program this year. And recycling has been fairly consistent. A little bit of a dip in FY 20. It'll be interesting to see what our numbers end up for 21. Okay, so I just want to spend a little bit of time on each of these programs. Again, the junk vehicle program, if you go to our RecycleWorks website, there's more information there. But basically, if you have a vehicle registered in Juneau and you are the owner of that vehicle and it's reached the end of its useful life, as long as it's free of garbage and reasonably clean, you can bring that vehicle in to be processed at no charge to you as the owner through the junk vehicle program. This program doesn't solve all of the junk vehicle and derelict vehicle problems that we have in Juneau. When we have truly abandoned vehicles, that becomes a JPD issue, and there's a process that you have to go through a DMV to be able to dispose of that vehicle. and that can be a problem. So really this program, if it's used properly, can help reduce the number of vehicles that JPD has to work through. Our HHW program, if you use this program regularly, you know that it has moved locations. So we have a new facility that was recently built, and we're now operating out of the landfill site, the waste management site, co-locating that program with the Recycle Works program as well, to help make it more convenient for users of that program. Residents can drop off HHW at no cost. Businesses can dispose of their hazardous waste for a fee. And I wanted to put a note here that used cooking oil is accepted as part of our HHW program. You know, we really want to keep used cooking oil out of the drains because it causes us all sorts of problems at our wastewater treatment facilities. Disposing of it in the landfill is also not a great option as well. So we do accept used cooking oil from restaurants. There's no fee currently for bringing used cooking oil in, even if you are a restaurant. So if you deep fry a turkey or something like that, and you end up with a good quantity of used cooking oil, that's something that you can bring in and dispose of through our HHW program. And that material is shipped south and then actually does go for recycling down there. So, and Clean Harbors is our contractor who operates the HHW program for us. I also had a note here. There's been some discussion on social media lately about where has the Has Been program gone. And so we used to operate a Has Been program where if material that was useful and in good condition was stored and set aside so that people could come in and see maybe old lubricants or you know, different products. And with COVID and the operational changes that we've made, that program was halted because of that. Then we had the move to the new facility. We're looking at that program. There were several logistical issues with that. We'd like to provide that service again, but we're sort of working through if and how we can offer that service again at our new location. So that's the status on that. CBJ Recycling Center. So this is a volunteer-based source-separated recycling program, and source-separated means that rather than having lots of different types of recycling together, we separate the different types of materials out so that when we ship it out, we ship it out as plastics or aluminum cans all together. So there's not that complicated sorting process that has to happen at the receiving site before those materials can be sent off to where they're going. So currently we're accepting plastics, number 1, number 2. We're actually looking at potentially being able to take number 5 plastic as well. It looks like there's a decent market for that material. So that's something we're working on. Glass is not shipped out for recycling, so it's a little bit different than the other materials. We process there. Glass is collected, but then it's crushed and used on site as part of the landfill operations by waste management. Aluminum cans, tin cans, and mixed paper and corrugated cardboard. So anyone in Juneau can come and drop off recycling for no cost through this program. And waste management is our contractor for operation of that program. One other note, another thing that has popped up on social media is questions about the hours of operation for the recycling center. And during COVID, waste management reduced the hours for landfill, for access to the landfill site, not just for recycling, but for their operations as well too. And so we've been talking with staff there, and by the week of June 14th is the current estimate, they're going to open back up to their normal operating hours. So they were closing about an hour early, 4 days a week. And we anticipate that getting back to our normal hours on the week of June 14th. Okay, so what materials are we recycling? And again, this is just the CBJ recycling program. I don't have data for Alaska Waste curbside commingled recycling. But if we look at over the years, what have we been collecting and shipping out? This is all by weight. And you can see paper and cardboard are the vast majority of what we're bringing in by weight. And it's kind of interesting to see the change over the years from more paper and less cardboard to more cardboard and less paper as we do more things online and have less printed materials. And there's a lot more shipping of goods coming in and out. So a lot of cardboard out there. Another question that a lot of people have, and it's a good one, is where do our recycled materials go and what do they become? And so when our recycled materials leave Juneau, they're collected at the recycling center, and then they're baled through our baler into cubes basically of recycled material, and they get put into containers and shipped south. And then at that point, they're received by the recycling arm of the waste management company, who then takes that material, sorts it if need be. So like the number 1 and number 2 plastics would be sorted out from each other. And then they work with lots of different companies down there to provide that material to different companies. And so this is, as of last week, talking with the staff member down there, this is where our recyclable materials are going. Almost everything is used domestically, other than some going to British Columbia. And these are some examples of what the companies that are taking our materials are using them for. Another question that comes up quite a bit is contamination, and how much contamination do we have, and how much of this material ends up getting landfilled and not recycled. And I think, the fact that we're doing source separated recycling for this program is pretty important. And from what we understand, our material is pretty clean. When it comes down there, there's not a lot of contamination, so there's not a lot of waste that ends up in the landfill. Some folks probably know the staff member who's driving the forklift in the recycling center, and he does a pretty good job of trying to make sure that everybody gets what needs to, what's appropriate for the bins in there. So it's helpful. So looking at some data and some cost information about this program over the years, we have data back to 2001 when we started doing this. And so the orange line here shows the total program cost for our CBJ Recycling Center over the years. And so it's fairly stable for a while. Definitely been going up in the past several years as shipping costs increase and revenues from recycled materials decrease. And then if we look at, how much material we're recycling, we were sort of growing for a while, and then we reached a peak in 2011. 2012 is when curbside recycling became an option through private business. So we saw a reduction in what was coming in through our program when that happened, and it's been relatively stable, I would say, since then. And if we look at our program in terms of cost per ton of material that's actually recycled, I don't include any of the glass, of course, in this because it's not shipped out of town. But in the early years of the program, when we weren't doing as much, the cost per ton was much higher. It has also been going up over the last few years, again, as shipping becomes more expensive and our revenues from recycled materials are going down. Curbside recycling, I wanted to put this up here. Again, this is Alaska Waste's program. It's not CBJ program. But a lot of people have questions about where does that recycling go? Is it something CBJ is paying for? You know, how does that intermix? And so it is, again, it's a service that's offered by Alaska Waste that residents can pay for. We don't manage or oversee that program. We do let anyone who's collecting recyclable materials in Juneau, we allow them to use the baler for that purpose. It is a CBJ owned baler, but we don't pay for the processing and we don't pay for the shipping for that program. Just wanted to give a quick recap of some of the past planning efforts. And if you're interested, all of these reports are on our website, except for the JCOS report, which I'll get to in a minute. But there was a study done in 1993 looking at new landfill sites and what areas in town might be appropriate for a new landfill when our current landfill fills up. There used to be an incinerator that was used at the waste management site that closed down in 2004, which started you know, some local discussion about recycling and waste reduction, led to some of the efforts that we have in our current program. There's a 2006 Southeast Conference Regional Solid Waste Planning Study. You know, we have solid waste challenges here, and other small communities in Southeast have challenges as well. So there was a regional effort to look at whether or not it made sense for us to join forces and think about this as a regional problem. In 2008, CBJ did a solid waste management strategy study, hired a consultant to look at that. One of the main recommendations in the first recommendation was for CBJ to take on the role of garbage hauler to have more control over the waste stream. And so we applied for the RCA certificate. We also tried to acquire it and buy it from the garbage hauler at the time. And those efforts were not successful for various reasons. So that's where we are currently in our management structure. In 2014, after our sludge incinerator was decommissioned, we looked at biosolids and lots of different options for how we would deal with biosolids. There's some good information in that study as well about some of the different options that we looked at. We are currently drying our solids. And then in 2016, there was a composting feasibility study looking at the potential for CBJ to take on a composting program. And that is linked on our website now. It wasn't previous to this last week, but it is up there now. Also, JCOS has recently produced a solid waste report with lots of great information. And there's a link to that I believe Gretchen is going to provide, or Beth is going to provide. And there's a lot of ongoing discussion at our Public Works and Facilities Committee meetings about solid waste, where we are and where we're going. So overall, you know, if we look at our programs and where we are today and how much we're diverting from the landfill, what this pie chart shows is the average annual tons of solid waste that's landfilled. And this is an average over the past 5 years. And generally about 23,000 tons of municipal solid waste, so typical household garbage waste, waste from restaurants and businesses, and then about 7,000 tons of construction waste. So our numbers have been fairly consistent, I would say, in terms of the amount that's landfilled every year. The CBJ Recycle Works programs divert on average about 4.5% of the total landfill material, or if you want to just look at it as part of the municipal solid waste, about 6.5% of that. Those percentages don't include any material that is diverted from the landfill by Juneau composts, composting operations, or curbside recycling. Again, that's Alaska Waste Program, and we don't have their volumes to be able to include in that. So, you know, as we think about solid waste, I just wanted to end with this slide. This is a waste management hierarchy from EPA. And if you think about, you know, the different programs and what we're doing and what we could do in the future, you know, treatment and disposal, that's the end of life for that material. And so it's generally the least preferred method of dealing with solid waste. If you can put some energy into that or use that material to recover some energy, that's a step up. If you can actually recycle or compost it and reuse it into an addition, a new material, you know, that's even better. And at the very top, and something that we don't think about a lot, is source reduction and reuse, right? So if it's not a waste in the first place, then we don't have to deal with it. So lots of different angles to think about if we're looking at the solid waste problem and you know, how to make changes. So with that, hopefully I was about half an hour. I will leave you with lots of websites and contact info for you know, some of the programs and the businesses that I talked about today. And I'll take any questions.
Okay, hi, Lori. So I'm just going to be facilitating the questions. There are a couple in the Q&A and there's one in the chat box as well. The first one is about recycled materials. Can you rank them as to their profitability? Which ones pay for their shipping and which ones cost us to ship out?
So that has changed a lot over the years. And, you know, even every month, there's a different price associated with some of the different commodities. I don't know that any of the materials actually pay for their shipping, but we do get revenue currently from cardboard and aluminum. Am I missing anything? I've got Stuart here in the office with me who knows this and tracks this on a regular basis. Is that correct?
Yes, and occasionally paper.
Yeah. Occasionally a little bit from paper, but currently that's what we get revenue from.
Okay, and so the next question is, what is the CBJ recycling program's cost recovery ratio, if there is any, which I guess that's related.
And I'm assuming that cost recovery ratio is looking at what we would make from the recycling materials, like the revenue versus the overall problem or program costs. You probably don't know because you didn't ask the question, but I'm assuming that that's the question, and I don't have those numbers. I could certainly work them up, but the revenue is very small compared to the program costs. Like we're not doing this as a financial, you know, for a financial benefit.
Okay, the next question is, this person is interested in statistics on what or how much makes it into our landfill, but that doesn't have to be there. So it's a reflection of how hard individuals and businesses are kind of working on this issue.
You know, so looking at the diversion rate that I can calculate based on what I know we're diverting through the CBJ recycling program, we're somewhere, depending on how you want to calculate it, between 4 and 6%, assuming contribution from known other diversion through curbside, commingled recycling, and Juneau composts. I would say we're still probably somewhere less than 10% diversion. And I think, you know, there's a lot of food waste that goes into the landfill that could be recovered. And you know, there's different types of programs in different places. So I think, and Lisa may have some thoughts on this too, but maybe about a 30 to 40% goal, diversion goal would be on the upper end of what we would could hope to be able to divert from the landfill. But again, it's a complicated question, right? Because if you also look at source reduction and not using that waste in the first place, can you calculate that into diversion as well too? So.
Yeah, and before I go to the next question, I could just add on to that a little bit. In CBJ documents from, I think it's the 2007 study, they have a waste characterization in there. And so it has a pie chart on what things go into the landfill and what things could potentially be diverted. And their numbers are about 37% is recyclable and 23% is compostable. And composting is just a kind of recycling. So that's about 60% is their projected amount of what ideally could not be landfilled. And then, so I'll just move on to the next question here. Junk cars. Is there a fee on car registration that comes through Juneau to pay for the junk program? Is it enough?
Yeah, so we used to use those fees that you paid as part of registration to fund that program. The funding mechanism has changed, and those fees are now diverted to our streets program, and so the junk vehicle program is paid for as part of the general fund.
Okay, and next one is, what about e-waste? I work in IT and our agency has a huge pile and I feel horrible about dumping it, but my office is getting stuffed. So where are some options for it to go?
Stuart, do you want to chime in on that one? All through HHW?
Yeah, that's all for HHW.
Yeah, it's all through HHW. So you can bring it to the household hazardous waste facility and they'll take it.
Okay, that looks like that's all of the questions that have come through the chat. I guess if anybody else has any questions, right now is the time you want to type them into the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen.
While there's a pause, I just wanted to let everyone know that there's a link to the JCOS website in the chat box, and there is a link to the JCOS report on Juneau solid waste fact sheet also in the chat box.
Okay, we had one more question come up and it says, more about what happens to biosolids, please.
Where to begin? Biosolids, depending on how much history you have. So we recently installed a biosolids dryer. Before that, we were shipping wet sludge south for disposal in a landfill in Oregon. And it was a pretty messy operation, you can imagine. Not only was it expensive, but there was a really good possibility that any of our intermediate handlers along the way, be it AML and longshoremen or any of the different companies would say, we're done. We don't want to manage this waste. Shipping wet sludge is not a great business to be in. So we looked at lots of different options for what we could do with our sludge to be able to dispose of it or use it in a different manner, and installed a biosolids dryer. So now we take that sludge and we dry it to a point where it's a class A biosolid. So it's very dry. It doesn't have microbial concerns anymore. And in many places they're using biosolids for lots of different things. So agricultural purposes, burning, for fuel, lots of different uses. There are a lot of discussions underway right now for what to do with our biosolids. We were landfilling them locally. We're currently going south to Oregon and our landfill down there because in part of a PFAS issue. So PFAS, if you're familiar with that or have been following anything about PFAS in the news, we do have low concentrations, but some detections of PFAS in our biosolids. And so that has impacted what we can do with those biosolids and what end uses are possible. And it's something that the state of Alaska is working through. We don't have standards yet for allowable amounts of PFAS or what can be done with those. So it's an ongoing discussion that we're sort of problem solving in terms of what to do with those biosolids at this point.
Okay, so there's another question here. It says, what about dog waste? Composting options, there seems to be huge volume.
I know folks, some folks do that at home, have home dog waste composting. I know there's been some discussion in the past about doing a pilot project on that. And I think, that's a possibility, but it's not something that CBJ is currently doing.
Okay, well, that is all the questions that have come up so far. Maybe we want to do a last call. If anyone has another question, type it into the Q&A now. But I think most things seem to have been covered. Okay, one more. Lori, if you had a magic wand and could fix one thing, what would it be?
Oh, solid waste related, huh? There's lots of things I'd like to fix with the magic wand. I think Juneau is a great place for so many reasons, and part of that is our location. I think our climate and our setting sometimes make options that are available other places more complicated and more costly here. So if I could eliminate that aspect, that's one thing that I'd like to do. I don't know, I'd have to think about that a little bit more.
Okay, another question here. Can you elaborate on the possibility of CBJ acquiring the certificate from Alaska Waste?
Yeah, and I'm going to be repeating things that have been told to me in the past because I was not here or a part of the discussions when any of this happened. So bear with me on that. But so there was an effort to apply and to acquire the certificate of necessity and convenience for garbage hauling through the RCA. And at that point in time, what I understand is, there was already a company that had that. So having two certificates in the same community was going to cause issues with competition. And now you've got, the city competing against a private business. So that did not seem like that was going to be a good way to move forward. And then CBJ entered negotiations with, it was Aero Refuse, I believe at the time, to acquire that certificate, basically buying it from them. And I think the costs went up and up and got to the point where it wasn't feasible for CBJ to take that on. I believe there were also other negotiations at that point to try to work through some of the major issues that were going on, and so like meet some of the residential needs a bit better. And at that point, that effort was stopped. So that's what I know about that. It was attempted in the past, and it did not work out. So.
Okay, so I don't know if we want to do a going once, going twice, one last time, Lori. I'm not sure what our protocol is here.
You know, one question that Anjali had asked was about follow-up discussions. And so, you know, there's a lot of topics here, obviously, that we could spend a lot more time talking about. And this is really just sort of the groundwork, not parsing through, you know, other more detailed issues. So, you know, if folks have things they would be interested in learning more about or diving further into, that might be something worthwhile to put in the Q&A for planning for future.
Okay, one more question popped up. How is solid waste from cruise ships handled?
So that's not something, let's see, that's handled with Alaska Waste. I know Tourism Best Management Practices has worked on that issue with the cruise lines, but that is an issue between Alaska Waste and the cruise lines. Waste management, sorry, not Alaska Waste. Maybe they're involved with hauling it.
Yeah, and I could maybe point, there is a KTOO article that was published in the fall. And so you could find a little bit of information on there. And I think there was a little chart saying percentage wise, how much waste management had recorded as coming from the cruise line. But yeah, it's not really CBJ's realm because it's a cruise line's a private business and the hauler's a private business and the landfill's a private business. And so it's tricky to get that information.
Lisa, there's also a question I think you missed about someone asking about an incinerator. I think it was second to the last now.
In the Q&A, I don't see it. If you see it, Gretchen, I would say read it. I don't see it on my end unless is it in the chat.
It came in after the CBJ acquiring a certificate from Alaska Waste, and it says, what about a new incinerator?
Oh, okay. That doesn't show up on mine. I have anyway. So yeah, what about a new incinerator, Lori?
Yeah, so again, this is, you know, an incinerator is a different method of treatment and disposal. Currently, we have a landfill, and that's what we're using. An incinerator would be a different method of disposal. And certainly someone could buy an incinerator and use it. The permitting requirements would be substantial on that. In general, the waste stream that we produce is small enough that financially, that doesn't seem to pencil out if you're just looking from the financial aspect of it. It's not something that we have dug in and investigated outside of the biosolids study and looking at that waste stream in detail. But generally, you know, our volumes are small, and you know, we would be you know, subject to lots of regulations on that as well too. So it certainly is a disposal method that would be an option, but who would buy it and you know, how the costs work out would dictate that. And again, You know, I guess if CBJ wanted to buy an incinerator and then charge less than the landfill, then, you know, that could be an option. But financially, that probably wouldn't be a good proposition.
I don't see any more questions. So another last call, or do we want to wrap this up, Lori? I'm not sure what to do.
We're getting pretty close to 1 o'clock.
Right, I think we can just wrap it. Give people 5 minutes to go stand outside and the sun's shining. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Certainly thank Lori for her presentation and Lisa for moderating the questions, and trustee CDD administration for making this happen through their Zoom account. So again, we JCOS offers these sustainability sessions fourth Thursday of the month. So stay tuned. We're still in the scheduling mode for the summertime, and you'll be able to find out what's in the offing through CBJ's public calendaring information. So thank you, everyone, and we'll sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. That was great.